For thousands of years, history forgot them. Yet hidden in caves and riverbeds lie the skulls of women whose strength and survival may have changed the destiny of our species. The real question is, without Neanderthal women, would we even exist? For centuries, we have imagined prehistory as a tale of firelit caves and spear-wielding hunters. But what if the true architects of human survival were not the towering men of muscle, but the women, whose bones now whisper from the depths of stone and earth? Women whose skulls, carefully preserved by time, reveal a story of resilience, adaptation, and hidden power. A story that suggests Neanderthal women may have carried the very keys to human destiny, shaping not just their own species, but ours as well. And as we look closer at the scattered remains from the Mara skull in southern China to the Namada fossil of India, from the Tabun caves of the Levant to the ancient crania of Italy and France, we begin to see a network of female faces connected across continents, a mysterious web of similarities that hints at a forgotten lineage, one that linked Asia and Europe long before modern humans entered the scene. A lineage where women were not passive figures but active survivors who bore the burdens of ice ages, predators and interspecies conflict, and it is here, in the contours of bone and the shape of frontal sinuses, that we glimpse their silent struggle against extinction. For Mara, with her thick brow ridges and archaic brain case, suggests an ancient experiment in human evolution. A woman whose life might have straddled two worlds, still rooted in the robust features of Homo erectus, yet leaning toward the distinctive visage of Neanderthals. A fusion of strength and adaptation forged in the unforgiving landscapes of prehistoric China, and nearby across the Indian plains, Namada emerges, her skull broad and strong, her cranial capacity rivaling ours, her form bridging east and west, as though she stood at the very crossroads of ancient humanity, a sentinel of genetic possibility whose very survival helped shape the populations that came after her. While in the warmer caves of the Levant, Tabun one lay hidden for more than 100,000 years, a female skull whose more delicate yet still distinctly Neanderthal features remind us that not all Neanderthal women were alike. That variation was their strength, that across climates and regions these women's bodies told a tale of adaptation written in bone and sinew. For the skull from Sacopastori in Italy, small and lighter, perhaps one of the earliest Neanderthal women, reveals an evolutionary stage still transitioning from older archaic humans into the fuller Neanderthal form, while Crepina in France, with its flattened parietals and expanded brain case, paints the picture of a species reaching its peak. And when we place these 5 female skulls side by side, Mara, Namada, Tabun, Sacopastori, and Crepina, we see not scattered relics but a continuum, a chain of survival that stretches across thousands of miles and tens of millennia, a chain forged by women who endured climates both glacial and temperate, whose strong bones and broad foreheads shielded brains that grew ever more complex, whose very reproductive strength ensured that populations endured through famine and cold. And it is no coincidence that these are female skulls, for females are the foundation of continuity, the carriers of maternal lineages, the vessels through which survival is tested generation after generation. And when we imagine these Neanderthal women not as abstract fossils, but as living beings, bronze skin glistening under the sun, dark hair tangled in the wind, muscles hardened by endless labor, we begin to sense the immense demands they faced. Demands that required both physical strength and an unbreakable resilience. Because in a world where predators lurked at every turn and ice storms could erase entire valleys, it was not enough to simply exist, one had to adapt or vanish. And Neanderthal women adapted, their bodies evolving thicker vaults to protect their brains, their faces shaping around vast nasal passages that warmed frozen air, their ear canals balancing them across rocky terrain, features that were not aesthetic but functional, survival etched into their biology. And as scientists today reconstruct their faces from fragments and CT scans, we see not monsters or brutish caricatures, but women startlingly familiar, faces that could walk among us with only the subtlest differences. And this familiarity strikes a haunting chord. for it suggests that our story is intertwined with theirs, that Neanderthal women were not just evolutionary bystanders but active participants in the saga that led to us. And as we dig deeper into their story, as we examine the genetic hints of Denisovan admixture in Asia and Neanderthal DNA scattered within us, we confront a profound possibility that the choices, struggles, and sheer endurance of these women shaped the trajectory of human evolution, deciding who lived, who mixed, and who vanished. And though their voices are lost to time, their bones still speak, whispering that the fate of humanity may once have rested in the hands of women who lived and died long before history began. The bones give us shape, but the DNA hidden within them gives us voice. And it is in the twisted ladders of ancient genomes that the most startling revelations about Neanderthal women emerge. For when scientists first extracted fragments of mitochondrial DNA from Neanderthal remains, they expected only silence, a dead end in the maternal line. Yet what they discovered was a pattern that pointed to intermingling traces of Neanderthal ancestry still carried in the blood of billions of people alive today. And this raised a profound question. If Neanderthal women existed at the same time as early modern humans, did they meet, did they mix, and did those encounters alter the fate of humanity itself? Because genetic evidence shows that while Neanderthal men may have contributed less to our surviving lineages, it was the women who left their mark, their maternal genes coursing through our bodies, carrying signals of ancient immunity, hair and skin traits, even tendencies in metabolism. And suddenly these fossilized skulls are no longer relics but ancestral mothers whose survival choices echo in us. Yet the story is not only about biology but also about encounters, about caves where two species stood face to face, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as mates, sometimes as enemies locked in territorial struggle. For archaeology tells us that Neanderthals were not primitive brutes but skilled toolmakers who crafted scrapers, spears, and even ornaments, who buried their dead with care, who painted walls with ochre, and if women were central to this cultural life, then they carried knowledge as well as children, passing down not just genetic code but stories, skills, and survival strategies. And here lies the deeper enigma. Were Neanderthal women the bridges through which culture flowed between species, mediators who softened boundaries that might otherwise have led to annihilation? Or were they captives taken in raids, absorbed into foreign tribes, their DNA persisting even when their voices were silenced? And as we ponder this, we must confront the archaeological record that shows periods of violent competition, overlapping hunting grounds, and even cannibalism. A brutal backdrop against which unions between species may have been forged as much by necessity as by choice. And still the line of survival ran through the women. For mitochondrial DNA, passed only from mother to child, shows us unbroken chains stretching back tens of thousands of years. And every chain that links Neanderthal to us begins with a woman, not a man. And so we must ask again, were these women overlooked architects of our genetic diversity? Silent partners in the story of Homo sapiens? Or were they the sacrificial figures whose assimilation marked the fading of their kind, yet still ensured their bloodline would live on inside ours? And if we imagine one such woman, standing on the threshold of a cave in southern Europe 40,000 years ago, her eyes fixed on strangers approaching from the east, we can begin to feel the weight of that moment. The collision of two worlds, two lineages, two futures, and in that single moment the fate of both may have been decided. For to join meant survival, but also transformation. To resist meant the risk of extinction. And somewhere between those choices the history of humanity unfolded. And as modern science reconstructs their genomes, we find not only evidence of interbreeding but also the reasons why Neanderthals may have disappeared. For though they were strong and adapted to cold, their genetic diversity was low, their populations scattered and vulnerable. And into this fragility came Homo sapiens with larger networks, wider migrations, and relentless expansion. Yet even as Neanderthals dwindled, their women were woven into our ancestry, absorbed into a rising tide. And so in every one of us today, a faint echo of those ancient mothers survives, an echo that influences how our immune systems fight disease, how our skin adapts to sunlight, even how our brains respond to stress. And in this sense, Neanderthal women did not vanish, they became part of us, shaping us in ways still being uncovered by geneticists. And here lies the paradox: that the very extinction of their species became the continuation of their legacy. And though no words remain to tell their side, their bones, their DNA, and their silent cultural imprints speak volumes, urging us to reconsider not only what it means to be human, but who truly carried humanity across the perilous bridge of prehistory. Because in the end, it may not have been the strongest hunters or the fiercest warriors, but the women, the bearers of continuity, who decided our fate by enduring, by choosing, by surviving long enough for their essence to become inseparable from ours. And so the story is not just about them, but about us. For when we look in the mirror, we may be looking into the eyes of Neanderthal women who lived and loved in a world long lost, yet whose decisions ripple still in the blood of modern humanity. When we step back from the scattered bones, the fragments of DNA, and the silent caves, what comes into focus is not the extinction of a people, but the persistence of a legacy carried most powerfully through the women, whose bodies bore the weight of continuity. Because for every fossilized skull that we unearth, there are countless others that have crumbled into dust, lost forever beneath soil, stone, and time. Yet even in their absence, the echoes of their existence still shape us in ways we cannot easily dismiss. For the traces remain in the curvature of our faces, in the resilience of our immune systems, and in the silent genetic signatures that still whisper through our bloodstreams. And what is striking is how Neanderthal women, long written off as marginal or secondary figures in the grand evolutionary drama, now emerge under the scrutiny of modern science as central actors, hidden architects of survival. Individuals who held together fragile bands of hunter-gatherers, who passed on not only genes but knowledge, customs, and resilience, whose choices in nurturing, protecting, and sustaining their children and communities may have mattered more for the survival of their kind than the thrust of any spear or the strike of any stone tool. And what becomes most remarkable when we view their legacy through this lens is how they did not truly vanish in the way old textbooks once insisted. For their disappearance was not clean like a fire being snuffed out, but instead their story blurred, merged, and seeped into ours, so that rather than being erased, they became absorbed, woven into the rising tide of Homo sapiens, leaving behind a legacy not carved in monuments or artifacts, but inscribed in the very architecture of our biology. And this is why every time our immune system responds with defenses shaped by ancient Neanderthal genes, every time our hair or skin reacts to climate in ways that echo adaptations honed in Ice Age landscapes, every time our bodies reveal hidden traits that trace back to them, we are continuing the strategies of survival pioneered by women who lived and died more than 40,000 years ago, making their extinction paradoxically a kind of survival victory. For they became too deeply entangled in us to ever be entirely lost. Yet their story was never a simple one of absorption, because the fossils themselves reveal not uniformity but a startling mosaic of diversity, a patchwork of women with features both archaic and modern, from Mara in southern China with her Neanderthal-like sinuses and archaic brain case to Namada on the Indian plains bridging Asia and Africa, from Tabun in the Levant with her transitional features to Sacopastori in Italy with her early Neanderthal traits, to Crepina in France already displaying hallmarks of the classic form, each skull a frozen testimony that Neanderthal women were not mere shadows repeating one pattern, but active participants in a dynamic, ever-shifting evolutionary experiment sculpted by geography, climate, and chance. And this recognition forces us to rethink what survival meant in deep prehistory, because it was not simply the triumph of one species over another, but the weaving together of lineages, the blending of features, the sharing of adaptations across continents. And when we realize this, we see that the human story is not a straight ladder of progress, but a tapestry of overlapping threads in which Neanderthal mothers, daughters, and sisters wove themselves indelibly into the pattern, And the irony is that the very figures once thought of as others or failures now reveal themselves as crucial strands within us, for their voices may be silent, their bones fragmented, their names forgotten, yet their influence remains etched in the human condition, so that when we look into a mirror today, we are not looking at a face born solely from one uninterrupted lineage, but at a reflection of blended ancestries, of lives lived in caves and valleys long ago, of women who endured harsh winters, bore children in danger, gathered plants under an unforgiving sun, and carried within them the strength of generations. And it is in this recognition that the deepest truth lies, that Neanderthal women did not simply vanish at the margins of history, but in a very real sense shaped the course of human destiny, not by disappearing but by becoming part of us. Their story folded into ours, their legacy hidden yet alive, breathing still in the story of who we are and who we became.